Welcome to God and Autobiography, the podcast. I'm Scott Langdon, your host, and this week, Jerry and Abigail return to round out our year with another intimate dialogue and deliver a really intriguing look at why and how God allows evil. How can we account for what seems like God's ambivalence? And what's love got to do with all of it, especially when it comes to our desire for truth? Also, this being our last episode of the year, I'd like to take just a moment to say how grateful we all are to have you out there listening. Have a happy new year, and we'll see you next week with plenty to come in the year ahead. Here's Jerry to get the conversation started. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Well, thank you, sweetheart, for joining me in another intimate dialogue. Intimate, but not overly intimate, because we have guests here with us. And we have serious matters to talk about. My last From God to Jerry to You was about what I think of as the climax of God and Autobiography. It's not till close to the end of the book, not the very, very end, but chapter 68 out of 70 chapters. I start realizing, reading John Levinson's book, Creation and the Persistence of Evil, that the things he's saying seem to be what God has been telling me. And so I give God six, kind of my own takeaways from Levinson's account, which is an account of the Old Testament, or careful reading of the Old Testament, creation and the persistence of evil, that evil doesn't quite go away. And God keeps fighting evil. And then the surprising thing, and I know you've been reading this book as well, sweetheart, and it is a surprising book. I'd not read this anywhere else. He's a big professor at Harvard. He certainly knows his stuff. But the key point, which was number 3 in the list in that chapter, is there is a negative or incomplete side to God. So a lot of the key for why evil is persistent is that, well, God isn't totally pure, totally perfect. There's a negative or incomplete side to God. And, I was discussing this with some of the team that puts on God and Autobiography podcast, and people take this differently. And how did you take it? I'll tell you how I took it, but let's first hear how you took it.
It's not unfamiliar to Jewish thought and experience, and I think Levinson's subtitle doesn't reference just the religion of Israel, of the biblical for court to Judaism, but also the subtitle, the word Jewish is in it. Rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism we know. There are all kinds of anecdotes, Midrashim, which are half fanciful and half ironical and somehow capture in the Jewish equivalent of a haiku this strange acceptance, familiarity with God's ambivalence.
God's ambivalence.
God's ambivalence. There's one such anecdote that has God answering the query of Moses from the afterlife, who best understands me, Moses, now? And God whisks him along to, I guess, the one close to 135 of the Common Era. And there's Rabbi Akiva teaching in a rabbinical school, and Moses says, he's teaching about Mosaic thought, and Moses says, I don't understand a word he's saying. And God says, that's okay. He understands you. So there's this ironical acceptance of the fact that in reading biblical experience, we don't read as archaeologists. We read as the people we are now, delving into the continuity of changing experience. Doesn't change so dramatically that we don't see ourselves in it, but we're not, as I said, archaeologists. We're not doing time travel. And then the next thing, in the same rabbinical midrash, is that haiku, as I call it, is that God spirits Moses along and shows him what befalls Akiva. Akiva has backed the wrong pretender to the messianic claim, and the Bar Kokhba uprising that was disastrous for the Jewish people resulted in their exile, second exile, and Akiva's nailed to some kind of a flooring, and I don't know, he's being skinned alive, or something you don't want to visualize. And God says, this is how I treat my friends. And Moses immediately answers back, that's why you have so few of them, which you don't talk that way to somebody whom you hold in nothing but awe for the transcendent. You talk like that to your mommy. That's how you talk with the most familiar, loved people whom you reproach for not coming up to your needs, but you don't reproach for being themselves. Somehow
Well, when they let you down, you're not necessarily surprised if you know them well. Your brother-in-law, well, sometimes he's helpful, sometimes he's out to lunch or whatever way.
Yeah.
And you kind of know that going along. And well, okay, that's brother-in-law. So, you live with it. He's a good husband to my sister or whatever.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an intimate family type relationship.
God is family in a way that it sounds arrogant to postulate such a thing, but it isn't experienced in a mood of arrogance. It's, it's what you feel about family. On the one hand, you don't want to be an orphaned, you don't want to be isolated in the vastness of the human population. On the other hand, its family is not an unmixed blessing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of family you don't want the world to know as much about as you know.
The other side of that story of God's incompleteness or lack of fulfillment, he's not quite fully God, you might say, not fully in command. And therefore evil has this power, is almost like periodic floods or monsoons or something. Here comes evil again, and God can't quite control them all, in part because, they're an aspect of God. It doesn't seem that God has a wicked or malevolent side. It's as it developed in my prayer experience, it seemed more that God was unintegrated. An awful lot of our glitches and faults have to do with our different parts aren't working together. So sometimes we kind of are brave, and at other moments we aren't because some other part of ourselves kicks in and determines our behavior, and so we run and hide, or we have all these different aspects. And even at the organic level, a lot of organic problems is the thyroid and the kidney aren't working together right. I'm going through something with doctors, I should drink more water, but on the other hand, another doctor says you have low sodium, you should drink less water because that sort of dilutes it or something. Okay, well, these parts, the things don't all integrate harmoniously the way they do in a wonderful musical group or orchestra or something. Everything works together, and God is in the middle of all of that, and God in some sense is all of that, being the pushes and pulls of life and reality are God's life. And it's evolving. I mean, that's why the story doesn't just stop there with a kind of a snapshot, but one of the first things I was told at prayer before I ever got to Levinson, and it puzzled me totally at the time, what God said to me, I am an evolving God. And that didn't fit any idea of God I had ever had or heard of. But I thought just, I just wrote it down, remembered it. But the evolving, God is changing. And what became clear to me before reading Levinson, but Levinson crystallized it, that, well, how does God progress? What is God's story? God told me, I want you to tell my story. And what is that God's story? Well, it turned out a lot of God's story is how God's interacting with the religions of the world, the cultures of the world, the different peoples of the world, with the different individuals in the world. And God's story is the story of God's interaction with us. And we are kind of intimate with God. And we have God inside, we have God outside, and we are intimate, and we are interacting. And the whole Old Testament, of course, is one story of interactions, but the others are also stories. The Mahabharata is a story of human interactions with the divine. And God, like people growing up and going through life, and you have different family events, different relationships, and you learn something from them, hopefully, and you kind of grow. I've been thinking recently about some friends who went through tragedy, almost terrible, terrible tragedy. And I noticed right away, he is deeper now. Another dimension is added to his character. And that story has its own evolution, be too personal to describe it. But that wasn't the end of the story, just being, having gravitas, having a kind of, deeper sense of life. But it's led then to certain actions that come out of that. Well, this is how it happens for God. You interact with people, you grow, you learn about yourself. And God constantly says, when the Taoists reacted to an aspect of the divine in the way they did, God says, it's like I hadn't noticed that about myself. And this is something that happens to us as we go along in life. Someone reacts to us in a certain way, and they say, you're very funny. Well, maybe you hadn't realized you were funny, but now, really? That kind of helps you be funny, it helps you actualize yourself.
Thinking about something analogous, you were told by God that the old religions, the group that we know, with all the well-known names that you study if you're a religion major or going to be a theologian, were the latest thing back when they were first revealed to their teachers and promulgators. But God has moved on, history has moved on, the human race with its experience and its new communicative um, almost promiscuity. We all know each other's business from, China to the Philippines and down to Buenos Aires. Wherever there is something to be known, we can get connected. So all that is so different from how the God-human relationship first took its various shapes in discrete and mutually opaque cultures around the planet Earth, that the whole thing is due for an upgrading, for a modernization, and your conversations with God recorded in God and Autobiography lay the foundations of those new relationships, which are now to be worked out. And analogously, I was thinking in my own case, and it's odd, it sounds almost vainglorious to compare one's own personal autobiography to God's autobiography, which is, as I said, the title of the book you wrote, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher. But in my own autobiography, it seemed that there were many years, decades, when I was trying to get back to how I used to be, as if to find my footing and climb up the staircase of my life, this time with solid steps under my feet. And at a certain point, perhaps once I finished my memoir, Confessions of a Young Philosopher, or some sedimentary layer in our own mutual experience, or some combo of all those and more, I felt as if I've got it. But I get the point about the past, about all those sedimentary layers that underpin my foothold, my standing on life's ground floor now.
What did you learn? What did you discover?
Yeah, it's funny because I often refer to it ironically as I've gotten more superficial.
Right. I'm saying you've gotten more transparent.
Yeah. Now what you see is what you get. I'm quite shallowed out. What did I learn? I think I could encapsulate it. The human relation to God, my own included, is chronological or optimal, the optimal human relationship to God, the one that a well integrated human being ought to arise to, and God agrees to enter. The optimal human relation to God unfolds chronologically, one thing after another in time, and I had this insight years ago, but I seem to have grown into it and now integrally believe it, is historical, is temporal, is what's happening now and what happened within relevant memory, relevant to what we're doing and what we're up to at present, and foreseeable advances subject to modification, but to be gone toward on the basis of where we are now. So a kind of visibility of ourselves to ourselves and of ourselves to the God who sees us seems to be what I've, without sounding too pretentious, what I've attained, what I've come to, what I've climbed up into, though I had the concept for some years, I seem to now own it, not just conceive it, but really sincerely live that way. And it means that I don't need to track behind me or revisit incessantly the earlier layers.
So you don't need to carry your past like a string of tin cans. People sometimes say, tied to the cat's tail or something, dragging a bunch of tin cans. And the past can be that. I always myself think longitudinally, and I think both that I have a long past. I didn't just pop out into existence 2 minutes ago. After all, everything I am is what I've been, what I've come through that process. And so that's kind of questionable. Then what I guess the question is, what is the fruitful relation to one's past? It's not that you should live like an amnesiac, that you don't remember what happened, or you wipe it clean. There might be times people go through some horrible trauma. The best thing to do is just wipe out the memory. Just wipe it clean, or forget the Great War because it wasn't that great. So let's just not revisit that part, even though maybe you revisit in your nightmares. But whatever that is, but on the whole, one wants to remember one's past. You remember growing up, and that's sort of a good thing to do. And often revisiting growing up, what it was like in your home and with your parents and your neighborhood and your school. You learn something from going through that process. But we might also think about, again, God's perspective. God says, I'm an evolving person. At some point when I was praying about something in the book of Genesis or something, God says, well, I was young then. It's as though, well, yeah, it was kind of rough, and bad-tempered, and I don't know, a little inconsistent and so on. Well, I was young then and was just learning how to deal with people. And so it's almost like you look at your own childhood or teenage years or something. Well, you were young, and so you lurch this way, you lurch that way, and then you slowly learn from your mistakes, and you slowly grow up and mature. Well, God went through that, and it's with people, and he's going through it. His job is more complex than ours. I say his, though God is his, her, and other, all combined somehow. But going through this with multiple cultures, each one has its own youth. We tend to think of the cultures as ancient, as though they were old and wise, but actually they're quite young. You go back to the Egypt of the pharaohs, they're very young in terms of the human story and in terms of interacting with the divine. Or I kept trying to find the origins. That's just somehow everything has to start somewhere. And I read about prehistoric life and so forth, what we can deduce from what people buried, for example. They seem to believe in an afterlife because they buried the men with their spears and the women with their jewelry. So these patterns go way back. This is long pre-literate. And then the oracle bones, where they put the bones in a flame and they would crack in a way that resembled what became Chinese characters. And anyway, the seers, whoever they were, would interpret it just, is this an auspicious day to do such and such, Uh, and all of that is when people and God are very young, and God is learning from us about the different aspects of God. And you think of your memoir, Sweetheart, Confessions. You go off to Paris as a young woman, ready for life, and what better place to encounter life than Paris, of all places. And well, you have experiences that are positive and negative, and you learn from that. And there is a childhood story of Abigail, but your you might say adult story begins with that youthful experience in Paris, but it doesn't stop there. It's not as though you revisit that endlessly, but
No.
other than I noticed when we were first together, you would sometimes, when something new would happen, you would relate it. You would kind of figure out, oh, how does the past look now? One of the things about new experience is that it redefines the past. So now the past doesn't look the same anymore in light of, oh, it came out here, which is maybe quite unexpected.
Mhm.
And that's happening to God too. I guess that's part of where I was leading. But in terms of ourselves, that's maybe one good way to deal with it. I don't do that, but it seemed like a very fruitful way to connect your current self to your past self, or the current moment to past episodes that are relevant to your current moment.
Yeah, it, it's funny at a certain. I had a method. It was not original with me. It's the dialectical method, and I used it in most of my adult life until you and I met. And somehow it might have been a little before we met, or it might have been a consequence of your experience with God, but I did not so much have recourse to the dialectical method in charting my own course after that. It was more a personal prayer relationship than uh, it, but
Let's say a little more, if you would, sweetheart, about the dialectical method.
yes,
What is that like? How were you living before? You kind of spell
uh,
that out. And
I
this is somewhat typical of, you might say, of a philosopher type person, or many
yeah
intellectuals. You
yeah
have some
I,
rational method that you use to figure out your life, to make decisions.
yeah. Well, Socrates introduces our civilization to the dialectical method. He asks his interlocutors, the people he sort of buttonholes on the street or in certain areas of Athens, uh, what their animating motive is, what they think their life is about, what guides their footsteps through each day, and they state the rationale of their lives. Perhaps nobody's asked them to produce a rationale. One has this experience as a teacher. You familiarize your students with a concept of the um, rationale that guides a particular life, the reasons for it, the purposes semi-articulated that you're pursuing. And by the same token, often this effort helps one identify the purposes that the whole culture seems to be pursuing, so that you can either uh, localize yourself as a member in good standing, believing what intelligent people today believe, or identify yourself as somewhat outside the norm, and but put the intellectual props under yourself. I think otherwise, but I have the following reasons for how I think. There was a certain point in my life as a young assistant professor of philosophy where I thought, I'm home free. Philosophy is the queen of the sciences. I have the great honor and privilege of ushering young people into the courtyards of philosophy, which will help them live meaningfully and be aware of their lives and the animating principles that so far have guided them, and be able to revise those principles when the need arises. So all was well until, in order to keep my job, it was conveyed to me that I had to vote a certain way, which would have been contradicted by my better judgment, my personal assessment of that certain way, if I wanted to continue to teach philosophy.
Some crumb.
Yeah.
You're supposed to vote for some incompetent, but because the powers that be in the department were choosing that person maybe as their instrument or whatever. But anyway, they were lining up for that, and you and some others who, alas, did not have tenure, thought this was very poor judgment. And you all get to vote the way you want to vote.
Yeah, and you get to be
theoretically,
fired the way they want to vote.
Yeah.
So I knew, as I was asked, by a leading question by a senior professor who held an as yet unwritten evaluation of my teaching in his pocket, why I thought this professor was backing this substandard candidate for the very responsible post of chairman of the philosophy department where I taught and had all my life worked out. And I thought, if I lie, which is only tactful, I can't represent the philosophic pathway in life to my discerning, all too cynical, life knowledgeable students, students in their very late teens, 18, 19.
You always talk about these Brooklyn students as if you can't fool them. You can't, they detect a fraud or, a mile away. And
they smell.
And then you lose all credibility.
You can't talk about, I don't know, somebody I know described it as beautiful and sacred things if you're doing something ugly, because they can see ugly a mile away. They can smell it. And cynical, world-wise, street smart young people, you just don't want to be seen through. I don't mind grown-ups seeing through me, but these kids, no.
Well, you have an obligation to them. The grown-up next door neighbor, you don't have that same obligation, but you're teaching them philosophy. Philosophy is the love of wisdom, pursuit of truth. And what did you tell the senior professors?
Oh, he asked me why I thought if the candidate he was backing was as unqualified as I had said he was, how could I explain a man like him, the senior professor, voting for him? And, so I had a couple of seconds to view my life going down the chute There goes that job. There goes this wonderful perch that I have climbed up to in life. But on the other hand, I could see the eyes of the students as they would have appeared had they been looking at a phony. And I said, I just can't explain it, dear colleague, except on the supposition that he's weak and you think you can use him.
Yeah. So you knew the tactful answer, but the tactful answer was not the truthful answer.
Yeah.
And you knew that if you wanted to keep your job, the tactful answer would be wise, but you had another goal. You certainly wanted that job, but you had a second goal that outranked it. And that's, you've got to be truthful if you're going to be a philosopher and a philosophy teacher. Got to be truthful.
Yeah, very sad. So, there went that job, there went the next 7 years while I'm fighting to get the job back, and everybody's saying, give it up and don't be obsessive. And I'm thinking, I don't know how this story ends, so I'm not going to give it up till I find out. And in that experience, was it a piece of the dialectical method or not? It was, in the sense that if you believe X, you better prove it by acting as someone would act who believes X. If I believed that philosophy was simply a very high, if not the highest calling, certainly the highest calling available to me, then I had to act on as high a level as was available to me, and being a phony would not be consistent with that. So in a sense, I was living dialectically. I was doing and acting as I professed to be, to have as a purpose, as my professed purposes would have me act. But yeah.
So that's a rather complex intellectual assessment, playing out options.
Yeah.
And you were saying that you used to live dialectically.
Yes.
And that around the time you met me, that changed.
Yes.
And if you can say something about what the change was, what was the difference? What's your new way, which I guess is your current mode, right?
Yes, it is. Although I haven't jettisoned the dialectical method, it's good enough for Socrates is plenty good for me. I think it's good for anybody. You ask, under what concept of going forward, of the next step, are you in fact going forward? How does the culture reflect or jar against that concept? And those are relevant methods for living intelligently and truthfully and transparently. So I haven't surpassed them, as I don't think one can. Socrates laid it out, and the old guy was right. But something else happened, and I'd always thought, and dialectic is partly about human desire, if you hold something as your purpose, but you don't desire it, there's a discrepancy there. So the relation between a dialectically arrived at purpose and your own a medley of desires, your own inner life of desire, ought to be a close one, or else you're living with this gap. You profess to espouse some particular value or principle, but you, the desirous you, really doesn't. You're hanging back or you're wishing you were elsewhere. So I have taken seriously from the very beginning of my adult life, as soon as I could draw these distinctions, the life of desire. I've thought, no, you have to honor what you really want and line it up with the concepts you profess to value. And I had always valued true love. And I had always valued the prototypes of true love that are in Genesis, the first book of the Hebrew Bible. I don't know if there's anything analogous in the entirety of the New Testament, but the Hebrew scripture is about living on the timeline. Some of the incidents may be fanciful, but they relate to life on the timeline. Even the conjured up ones are evocative of what goes on with your feet on the ground, one step in front of the other. And the founders of the peoplehood that would live in a conscious relation to God as a real witness and a real co-player in the human story, all had a romantic life which seemed to be supply the preconditions, the erotic preconditions for their desire to do God's will, their desire to live in accordance with the will of the highest being. So I had always taken that seriously, very seriously, and I thought this is of universal import. Everybody wants a true love. And if you acknowledge and admit and recognize that this is what you really want, I mean, there may be some people I'm not taking in who don't. Surely there are, but I thought most people do, whatever their culture. I thought this is kind of general. Most cultures have some romantic story in them. So I thought I should take this quite seriously. And when I met you and began to notice that this was serious, which was sometime after everybody else noticed, I was busy. We were working on saving the college where I taught. So I was busy with the college where I taught and only, entertained the relation to you in my conscious awareness in that connection. But we had perhaps met once or twice personally by that time, in person for the first time, and talked at some length. And you'd exchanged with me the most chaste of kisses before climbing into a taxi and riding off to a train back to Washington. And for some reason, this very superficial kiss, very surface kiss, had the power, had an imprinting power And I thought, this is more than I bargained for. This is more than I expected to have to handle. But on the other hand, I can't lie to myself. So I thought, well, let me try to get some distance on it once I got home. I had, a few conversations maybe with friends, but mostly I thought I need to figure this one out. I need to stay in command of my life if I possibly can. I'm a philosopher. So let me use one of the philosopher's techniques called the phenomenological reduction offered to the world by Edmund Husserl. You take a step back from your experience and you bracket the question of its relation to reality, and you just look at it, you gaze at it. These are appearances in consciousness, phenomena. It's called a phenomenological reduction. I thought, let me look at it through the lens of the phenomenological reduction, bracketing the question of how real this was and how this might relate to my destiny in real life. And what happened was that trying to look at my attitude and memories and current experience with you, I could not look at it with the requisite detachment that belongs to this technique. Instead, gazing at it, unencumbered by presuppositions left or right, I found myself tumbling headfirst into it. And I tried to tumble back out of it. That did not work. And, I can't lie to myself. It's not worthwhile to have any experience accompanied by an all too generous dose of self-deception. You try to live honestly, and you can tell when you're lying to yourself. It feels different. So I thought, well, I seem to be in love, in love without a means of falling out of love.
Uh-huh.
And if so, then I need to see what belongs to this. Love has its own demands, and from biblical experience, from my parents' life together, I, perhaps unlike a typical modern person, took love very seriously. I had long thought that that's what is optimal in life, and that's what people secretly want. Okay, here it is. I didn't plan on this. I've got my life worked out. Love didn't ask me whether I had my life worked out or what my plans had been before it showed up. So, in a sense, I was living dialectically in that an unplanned, unlooked for, but equally undeniable reality suddenly took over the ramparts and the middle parts and the details of my life, and they recast it within a new picture frame, as it were. They retold the whole story of my life, but now differently vis-a-vis this new frame. And obvious to me was the implication: with love, you look at life differently, and the same dialectical obligation to be true to your experience still obtained, except with a sole difference that Socratic, the difference, which I didn't know would be a difference, with Socratic dialectic, normally or at least generally speaking, you come to the edge of some guiding concept and you realize the concept is inadequate to manage life in the light of some new and further experience. But Socrates doesn't come for the end of the concept of the love of wisdom. That is the guiding, that's the end of, in a sense, the end of the journey. And I guess you could say, en passant, in my voyage, animated by the love of wisdom, I came to an experience that doesn't contain its own terminus, its own inbuilt limits. I was willing to try it. Maybe it'll have inbuilt limits, but it seemed to me if we encountered those limits honestly together, we would recognize that we had been proceeding under some artificial limits or other, or non-necessitated limits, and we would transcend those limits. There wasn't anything in our relationship that involved falsehood.
Yeah, the love seemed to have more depths and limits.
Yeah.
Just one could go in deeper and deeper. As you know, I had this experience as you were going through just what you described, sweetheart. I, at my end, was going through. I'd never believed in romantic love. I thought I was looking for companionship of the sort of dating service is nice at giving you. I had a Myers-Briggs profile in mind. This is the kind of woman I need. And this had no relation to any of that. I was head over heels in full romantic love, and I didn't understand it. What is this?
Yeah.
And so I read the relationship books. What can the psychologists tell me? Well, they all said, I think a lot of your colleagues said things like this to you, but here the experts were saying it. It's deceptive. It's delusional. It's a projection. It's all projection, projection, projection. It will last for about 6 months, and then it will dissolve.
Yeah, I don't know where
you
they
think
got
she's
6.
perfect, and you'll find out she's not.
Yeah.
No, I did not think you're perfect. I'm not perfect. Why do I need perfect? It had nothing to do with being perfect. So all of that and what I thought, I just thought, haven't any of these people actually been in love? You're talking about when you described like that Husserl method, at least you're encountering the experience and learning from it, being truthful to the experience, not just often what I was tending to do as a less dialectical philosopher was just, as a kind of logician trying to figure this out. Well, that didn't really get me anywhere. And the only thing I commend myself for is, poo on logic then. If it's not helpful for this, then don't use it for this, and what will be helpful. And of course, that's what led me to pray, because I felt gratitude. It wasn't to help for me. I just felt gratitude and prayed. And, the story of God in Autobiography takes off from there. But, and that's why, I'm an epistemologist. So I developed, this is in my book, Radically Personal, an epistemics of trust. If you read the epistemologists, they're all based on Cartesian doubt and Hume's skepticism and so forth. They don't even know if there's a world around us, because maybe we're a brain in a vat, some of them say, all this kind of thing. There's an evil demon orchestrating illusions. Well, no, you're not going to get anywhere if you just start with doubt, doubt, doubt. If you doubt everything, the way knowledge actually works, if you look at knowledge is a phenomenon one encounters, and we have all these different disciplines that know things about history and about physics and about plants and so forth, and you trust your senses, you trust your memory, you trust your reasoning. You then correct them by further checking your experiences, other people's experiences, checking your memory against records, checking your reasoning. Have I made a mistake here? That's one reason for engaging other people. Here's how I'm thinking about this. Does this sound reasonable to you? And see, oh no, I think about it differently. Okay, but you can't do any of that unless you start with believing your experience, your memory, your reasoning, and so forth. And I don't see how you'd ever have a life of true love if you didn't credit the experience up front. And that's not so dialectical. I mean, it's not immune from dialectic because it can run amok. You can say, whoa, this head over heels thing. You often talk about dialectic as you find out what its limits, something's limits are. You have a worldview, an attitude, a thought, and you kind of test it against experience, against life unfolding. And sometimes you learn what its limitations are. Maybe it's true in a boundaried way, but not as true as it seemed, And so, okay, then you learn that and correct it. So that's also a learning experience. But this basic attitude of first give yourself to the experience. Learn all you can from within the experience before deciding it's reached its limits. Don't declare its limits before you reach them.
If you love truth, and why go into the love of wisdom, which is what philosophy means in Greek, if you don't, so supposing you know yourself well enough to know that you really love to find out what is true, you need to find out, you think it worthy of yourself, you have an opinion of yourself that you and the truth can live together, and something happens to you that doesn't present some of the earmarks of delusion or self deception, then you follow it. You follow it. About skepticism, since the 17th century, people have taken seriously the idea that I could be all alone. I could be, there might not be any people besides my own thinking. I think, therefore I am, says Descartes in the 17th century, and that's the only thing he starts as by being certain about. A recent 20th century essay by the English philosopher Mary Midgley points out that in order to say, je pense donc je suis, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am, you have to say it, which means you have to speak it, which means you have to make use of a language. And babies, infants, very small children, learn language almost before they know that it applies to themselves. So the first thing is not I think, therefore I am, but you say something to me, and therefore you are. And
right.
by extension, I am, I probably am. They make an inference later. Oh, I'm like the little kid who threw that ball at me. You think, therefore you are, and maybe I think, therefore I am, or you speak, therefore you are. So a lot of these skeptical postures come from posturing, come from pretending to doubt what you actually and sincerely and authentically do not doubt and cannot doubt. So how about start more naively with what you don't doubt?
Right. And that's more truthful. I mean, claiming to doubt or to be a cynic or everything's got to be proved to you is, well, as you put it, it's a kind of posture, a stance that you're adopting. It's not truthful to what you really think. Uh, you 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 bring out an umbrella to stop getting wet. You know, is rain real or anything like that? But then the people you see, and you're right. The child's first understanding is something seems like a unified mother-child world. You know, they're not differentiated at all. That slowly has to be learned. It doesn't start at all with the I. The I has to be learned in contradistinction to the you. They're learned simultaneously, in a sense, as you differentiate experience and learn. The child has to learn that mommy also has feelings, you know, and you learn that by mommy expressing them. So, and that's how you learn that you have feelings. Because the mommy says, oh, so your foot got hurt here, and let's kiss it and make it well. Oh, yeah, kiss it and make it well. And that's how the child learns, oh, yeah, I have a pain in my foot, you know, by these social interactions.
Yeah, they are prior. And if you think of evidence, apparently, that's beginning to unfold of the consciousness of the child in the womb, that would suggest, more than suggest, that the child's initial experience is a co-experience, a partnership, you know, a duality.
Yes.
You don't necessarily say it's her and me, but you say something.
You don't know how to say it in terms of persons. You don't know how to even count how many persons are here now.
Yeah.
If you've just got this rudimentary, not yet born, you know, child coming, is that another person? You know, well, it's the same person as the mother still. You know, biologically integral, the nutritional apparatus, it's all the same as the mother.
Yeah.
And you know, that's amazing.
Mary Midgley points these obvious truths, they're not self-evident in the logical sense, but they're as evident as anything can be, and points out that the skeptic is making an end run around what we all know. You know, it's almost a tour de force, the pretense of skepticism. And, you know, and if that's so, we live in a highly pretentious era where skepticism claims to dominate the thinking of the most influential pundits who style themselves philosophers, though I think you know, Socrates wouldn't lift a glass with them, lift a wine glass with them. They're not part of his symposium, but they claim to be the latest thing. And if that's anything like accurate, the latest thing is simply an empty claim.
Yeah, very disappointing upshot.
It's too bad.
And it can't be how they themselves live.
No,
I mean, that's what one
isn't.
knows.
It isn't.
Yeah.
It certainly isn't. So, you know, the culture needs to shed these habits of pretentious and hypocritical posturing, you know, this pretense of being intellectual, where you believe what nobody believes, or you claim to believe what you in fact do not believe, and neither does anybody else, and try to get sincere.
Yeah, it passes for sophistication, but sophistication is not as good as basic sincerity, i.e., being truthful to what you really think and feel.
Thank you for listening to God and Autobiography, the podcast. Subscribe for free today wherever you listen to your podcasts and hear a new episode every week. You can hear the complete dramatic adaptation of God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher by Jerry L. Martin by beginning with episode 1 of our podcast and listening through its conclusion with episode 44. You can read the original true story in the book from which this podcast is adapted, God and Autobiography as Told to a Philosopher, available now at Amazon.com and always at godandautobiography.com. Pick up your own copy today. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, please email us at questions@godandautobiography.com and experience the world from God's perspective, as it was told to a philosopher. This is Scott Langdon. I'll see you next time.